welcome back to this channel, Equine Hair by Sabina. Today I'm going to be going over banding the mane of the horse. So I'm going to be going over first short manes and then I'll move to long manes. There really isn't any difference, it's just long manes are a little bit harder because you have to worry about not tangling up the mane between each band. So you're going to have bands on your fingers is the easiest place to put them. The colors for the bands are usually going to be the color of the mane, or a general rule of thumb is white if you're feeling really confident. Even on white maned horses, white just kind of really brings attention to the bands. But if you're sure that you're not sure if they're super straight or they're not laying perfectly flat, then going with the color of the mane is a good way to kind of hide it while still having bands in the hair. And then you also want to have a comb so you can have nice even parts. And then a hair clip if you need it to keep it out of the way. I've gotten really good at just using my hand and being able to like band with just these two fingers and then this hand. But a hair clip just makes that whole process easier and you don't need to do that. But really, other than that, you're not going to use a lot of hair gel unless you really want to keep them in for a very long time or anything like that. So we're going to be starting with the shortened mane of the horse. This has been previously shortened but not necessarily thinned, but we're only going to be doing a few in the first section of the hair, so I'm not too worried about the thickness. You would want to thin it out if it's getting a little too thick, but his is pretty good. And so you're going to be starting, hopefully your horse will be a little more still than he is. And you're just going to be taking the first section, and I do about fingers width. That's a general rule of thumb for most styles you do on a horse's mane, be it a braid or a band, is just a finger's width, and try to get the parts straight and crisp if you can. You're not going to like lose points in your classes or anything like that, but it's just nice, and it makes sure that like each one ends up the same thickness, though these first few usually are pretty thin just because the hair on that part of the mane is usually pretty thin. And then if you see there, I like to take my rubber band and double band it like this so that I don't have to do like 50 passes around the hair before it's in place and it's secure. And then I just take it and do a tiny little ponytail. That's all these are really, is just tiny ponytails. But what matters is how you keep it tight to the crest so that it lays flat, and that you also keep all the hair together so that you don't lose any of that hair and make it stick up or anything like that. So just like that, and then I'm going to be able to pass one more time. Then you try to recover at least one of the two bands that you had together. If you can only get one, that's fine. Get it laying flat. So now it's laying flat like that, and I'm just going to try to even out the band so it's nice and square. So to tighten the bands, what you're going to do is you're actually going to take hair from the underside of the band and just pull on that rather than pulling just in half. So that way you get it tightened really nicely to the crest here. He's got his bridle path that needs a little bit of extra clipping, but it's not his show season, so we're not worrying about that. But the band itself should lay really flat. And then this is where if you wanted to add just a little gel so they stick together a little bit better, he's kind of got that fluffy consistency. So we're going to take a second one, about a finger's width. Perfect. Making sure that it's as crisp as you can get it. If I had a better comb, one with those really fine points to it, that would be really nice. And then I'm just going to hold this out of the way because I don't have a hair clip on me. I'm going to take my band, double band it. Keeping that out of the way, I'm going to take this next section, keeping it nice and flat, making sure that I'm not pulling up at any point so that it doesn't end up being like a unicorn's horn, because you want it to be a very nice flat ponytail. And then just like that. And then keeping the hair separate still, pulling on only the back half, the back portion of the band, the back portion of the mane, sorry. And just getting really nice flat bands like this. Okay, so we've got just this portion. I'm not going to do the whole mane today, but you're seeing how they're pretty even in their spacing and in their each amount, as well as laying really flat. And his mane is really well trained right now that it doesn't have a big kink from it like laying any certain way. Now these last few are kind of getting kind of full at the ends where they're kind of looking kind of frizzy almost. This is where I would take a little gel if I had it and then just smooth them down, but just for this video's sake, this is perfectly fine. And then you would continue this all the way down, keeping in mind that usually once you get to the wither area, it's going to be very sparse. And it kind of depends on the person if you want to continue trying to band that portion of the mane, or if you just want to kind of call it good and hope that the saddle pad hides it. Usually the saddle pads will hide it, no problem. But you'll see that this is the look we want, is that really flat, like not a lot of movement to the mane when they're going around in the show pen. So that's why we band our manes. And this is easier in a way when it's a short mane, but also a little bit harder. It's easier because there's a lot less hair to deal with, but it's harder because there's a lot less hair to deal with. So it just kind of depends. I find it easier to do a long mane actually, and it's just watching to make sure you don't tangle up the manes. So now we have the long maned horse ready. I've detangled her hair just with some water. No Shoshin, she's got a very soft, easy to comb through mane, which is really nice. And so for these, this is where you especially would want a hair clip, which I believe I grabbed. Anything like this, or those like prong clips that like hold hair out of the way. And again, you're going to want just about a finger's width, maybe a little bit more if they have thinner hair. If they have a thicker mane, you might do a little bit thinner. You kind of inverse it, just depending. And then you can just, I like to comb it out of the way so I know all the hair is in that section. And then clipping it. I'm going to push her back over there so you guys can see. I'm going to move my comb out of the way. And then grabbing a band, I'm going to once again double band just because it's easier for me. You don't obviously need to. And we're going to take this little portion into a ponytail. And then it's just a matter of keeping it really untangled, making sure it's not going to cross over itself and make any knots or anything like that. And also keeping it nice and flat. And then just passing over a few more times. Usually I get about 5 out of the bands that I use, sometimes 6, sometimes 4. If you have bands that are pretty stiff, then you might get a little bit less, obviously. But just enough that you can get the mane to really lay flat on the crest of the neck there. And we've got a little bit of her bridle path there. I'm not too worried about that because that wouldn't be there if this was show season. But again, tightening from the bottom to make sure it lays flat. And then we can grab our next section. Ooh. And doing the same thing, clipping this out of the way, grabbing a band off of your finger, double banding it in my case, though it's not necessary. And then banding, keeping the sections separate if you can. So each pass I do, I don't try to rush it, I just make sure they're nice and separate. And then I go for the next one. Good girl. And then one last one. I think I'm only going to get 4 out of this one. She's got a little bit of long fur right now too, so I'm kind of getting the fur sometimes. But I want you guys to look closely and see how thick this one is compared to this one. This is what I ended up doing one year, showing when I didn't have a lot of time to band in between classes. I ended up doing thicker bands, and they can still pass. They look really nice either way as long as you do them right. You get them laying flat. But it's more ideal to get this like almost exactly finger width, because this is, if you look, almost a finger and a half. So it's quite thick. It still looks good. I banded it well enough that it's laying flat. You can't really tell. But as long as they're pretty consistent, you can kind of go thicker if you're on a time crunch or anything like that. So I'm just going to clip that out of the way. So now I'm going to try to go consistently with that bigger section while not going too big. Kind of because I also am on a time crunch, but also just to show you that it can look good if you do thicker bands. You will also see people do like itty bitty teeny tiny micro bands, so they'll be like barely a third of this thickness, and then every 3 they'll band those together, and it looks really cool, especially for long maned horses. But I'm never going to have the patience for something like that. That is a lot of work, and that is just something that unless you're getting paid to do that and you're getting paid a lot extra, It's just something I don't see in my future, though. They are very nice to admire. So again, keeping it nice and flat, laying it down, keeping each section separate. So you'll see I'm kind of pushing the section away with this hand, as well as each time I pass over, I'm making sure they're separate before I pull through, like that. And then also just at the end, once you've gotten to the end, you can just kind of separate that way too. And making sure they're laying flat by pulling on the, by pulling on the bottom of the band, so it's really pulling towards the skin, really, instead of just pulling down or pulling apart. Something you can also do if you're noticing that the band's getting a little bit too much like this is you can pull down just slightly on the band itself over this so that you can tighten it here and get a more round frame, I guess. A rounder shape there. So this is the finished look on a long-maned horse. You'll see the bands are even between each part, so they're not lopsided one way or the other. They're laying flat. They're keeping the hair nice and flat on the neck. And they are relatively the same size, though obviously I did point out this one's much smaller than the rest of these, which is totally fine, especially because this portion of hair is very thick in comparison to the rest of them. I don't know why. Banding is kind of a fake it until you make it situation, where as long as you make it look good in the end result, it doesn't matter if one of them is a little bit thinner or one of them is just ever so slightly lopsided, as long as it's not noticeable.